The elevator opened on the 43rd floor of the Carano building, and Roman Vescari stepped out like a man walking to his own coronation. He wasn't. Alara was already seated at the conference table when he entered. No lawyer beside her, no assistant hovering at her shoulder, no tissue crumpled in her hand. She wore a gray dress she'd owned for 3 years, and her hair was pulled back the way she always wore it on Sundays when she was gardening. She looked exactly like what Roman had spent 7 years believing she was. A quiet woman from nowhere who'd been lucky enough to marry into something larger than herself. The divorce papers were spread across the table. His attorney had already reviewed them twice. Roman didn't sit down immediately. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than was necessary, watching her, and he told himself the strange tightness in his chest was nothing more than the inconvenience of the morning. "Elara," he said. "Roman," she said. That was all. 7 years, and that was the full weight of what they gave each other at the end of it. He crossed the room and sat across from her. His attorney placed a pen on the table near his hand. Elara's copy of the papers already had her signature at the bottom. Neat, unhurried, the same handwriting she used on birthday cards and grocery lists. Roman looked at it for exactly 3 seconds and then picked up the pen. He signed. He turned to the next page and signed again. He did not look at her face while he did it. He had made this decision 6 weeks ago when Dante Ferraro's people first approached him about the arrangement, and he had not unmade it since. The Ferraro alliance would end 5 years of low-grade warfare in the southern corridor. It would save lives, his people's lives. The price was a political marriage to Dante's youngest daughter, Camille, and the price of that marriage was this room, this table, this pen. Roman told himself these things clearly and in the correct order while he signed. When he finished, his attorney collected the papers and began organizing them into a leather folder. Roman finally looked up. Alara was watching him with an expression he could not immediately name. It wasn't grief, it wasn't anger, it wasn't the blank, controlled emptiness of someone working very hard not to cry. She was almost curious, like she was watching something she'd been waiting a long time to see. "You'll have the settlement transferred by end of week," Roman said. "The Meridian account. Everything we discussed." "That's fine." "The apartment on Kellner Street." "I don't want the apartment." He paused. "Alara, it's worth I know what it's worth." She said it gently, the way she said most things, without sharpness. "I don't want it." He studied her. 7 years of mornings over coffee, of silences across dinner tables, of her reading in the chair by the window while he worked through the night. And he realized now, sitting across from her in the gray fluorescent light of a 43rd floor conference room, that he had spent most of those years believing he understood her completely. She was uncomplicated. That was what he'd valued about her, though he'd never said it in those terms. She asked few questions. She didn't push. She was warm and self-contained, and she never reached for anything that wasn't offered. She smiled at him now, small and very calm, and it moved something in him that he immediately pressed back down. "Take care of yourself," she said. She picked up a small canvas suitcase from the floor beside her chair. He hadn't noticed it when he walked in, and she stood and walked to the door without hurrying. Roman sat there. He watched her go. He told himself it was done, and it was the right thing, and he had a meeting with the Ferraro lawyers in 4 hours. Then his phone buzzed. Marcus, his head of security, calling on the private line. Roman answered. "What?" "Boss?" A pause that wasn't like Marcus, who never paused. "You need to come to the window on the east side of the building, right now." Roman was not a man who took orders, but something in Marcus's voice made him push back from the table and walk to the east-facing window in the corridor outside. Below, at the building's main entrance, Alara had just walked through the glass doors, and waiting for her on the street, blocking 2 lanes of traffic without apparent concern, was an aircraft, not a helicopter. A private jet, matte black, sitting on a temporary landing strip that someone had somehow cleared on Fifth Avenue with the efficiency of people who did not ask permission from city authorities. On the tail, a silver crest Roman had never seen before. Clean, precise, institutional. The kind of mark that belonged on a central bank letterhead or a classified government document. 8 people in dark suits were arranged on the street in a formation that Roman, who had spent 30 years around security details, recognized immediately as the protocol used for heads of state. One of them stepped forward as Alara reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. He was 50, silver-haired, and he bent at the waist in a way that was neither obsequious nor ceremonial. It was habitual. The bow of someone who had performed this gesture 10,000 times. Roman couldn't hear what the man said through the glass, but he could read lips well enough. "Lady Ashcroft, we've been waiting." Alara did not break her stride. She walked through the formation and up the aircraft stairs without pausing, without turning, the canvas suitcase still in her hand. At the top of the stairs she stopped, just for a moment. Roman thought she might look back. She didn't. The stairs folded up, the aircraft door sealed, and Roman Vescari stood at a 43rd floor window with his hands hanging at his sides and watched the jet lift off Fifth Avenue as though the laws that governed every other thing in the city simply did not apply to it. "Marcus," he said into the phone. "Yeah, boss." "Find out who the hell that is." A longer pause this time. "I already started making calls." "Roman," another pause. Longer. "I'm not getting anything. The tail number traces to a shell company that traces to another shell company. I've got 3 different people running it, and all 3 of them just called me back to say they've never hit a wall like this." Roman pulled his eyes away from the empty sky where the jet had been. "Then hit it harder," he said. "Moji." The first thing Marcus came back with 18 hours later was nothing. Not incomplete information, not fragmentary leads, nothing. Every record that should have existed for a woman named Alara Ashcroft prior to 7 years ago had been removed. Not poorly covered, removed. The kind of erasure that required institutional infrastructure and someone who understood exactly which databases needed to be scrubbed, in what order, and how to make the absence look like a filing gap rather than deliberate deletion. "She was an orphan," Roman said. He was sitting in his office on the 16th floor of the Vescari Holdings building, jacket off, tie loosened, a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched sitting on the desk in front of him. "I ran a background check when we started seeing each other. I saw the file myself." "I know." Marcus was standing, which he always did when the news was bad. He claimed sitting felt too casual for hard conversations. "I pulled the original file we ran. The agency that generated it, Callaway Investigations, closed 18 months after your marriage. Owner relocated, no forwarding address, license surrendered. The 3 investigators who worked your case, one retired early, one moved out of the country, one died in a car accident 4 years ago." Roman looked at the glass of whiskey. "You're telling me my background check was fabricated. I'm telling you the people who could confirm it aren't findable." "That's the same thing." Marcus didn't answer that because it was true, and there was nothing useful to add to it. Roman turned to the window. Outside, the city moved the way it always did, indifferent, continuous, unaware of the fact that something had just shifted in the architecture of Roman Vescari's understanding of his own life. He had married a woman he believed he knew. He had divorced her with the clean efficiency of a business decision, and now he was sitting in his office at 2 a.m. being told that everything he'd known about her had been constructed and placed in his path like a stage set. "Who is Ashcroft?" he asked. Marcus pulled out a single sheet of paper. He set it on the desk. "That's what I found. It's not much." Roman looked at it. The name appeared 3 times in connection with financial movements large enough to register as anomalies in international banking surveillance records. The kind of movements that agencies monitored but couldn't legally pursue without a thread to pull. The Ashcroft name appeared as a creditor in the background of 2 major European banking collapses in the 1990s. It appeared as a silent stakeholder in a shipping consortium that, Roman now recognized, had been one of the primary logistical networks used by 6 separate organized crime families across 3 continents. And it appeared, once, briefly, in a declassified intelligence memo from 11 years ago that referred to an entity called the Ashcroft Dominion in the context of financial instruments with sovereign-level impact. Roman read that last phrase twice. "Sovereign-level impact," he said. "That's what it says." He set the paper down. He picked up the whiskey and drank half of it and set it back down. "Who are the families they bankroll?" Marcus named them. They were the names of powers Roman had respected and feared and negotiated with for 20 years, names that represented entire continental networks, names that made the Vescari syndicate look like a neighborhood operation in comparison. He got to the last name and stopped. Roman felt the whiskey turn cold in his stomach. The last name was his own. He didn't sleep that night. By 4 a.m, he had his financial people on a call, demanding they trace every layer of Vescari Holdings' external financing back to its origins. They worked until dawn. At 6:47 a.m., his CFO, a meticulous Croatian named Stefan Brack, who had never once in 15 years of service allowed himself to look frightened, called Roman back and said simply, "Roman, we have a problem." The problem was that 17% of Vescari Holdings' operational capital, not seed money, not a legacy investment, active operational capital that moved through their accounts every quarter, traced back through a cascade of intermediary entities to a single origination point, a trust. Registered in the Cayman Islands, established 40 years ago, administered by a law firm in Zurich that had never once made a public statement or appeared in any legal proceeding. The trust's name was Ashcroft Meridian. Roman sat with that information for a long time. Then his phone rang again. Not Marcus, not Stefan. An unknown number, not unknown in the sense of a withheld caller ID, but unknown in the sense that the number was formatted in a way that didn't correspond to any country code Roman could place. He answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older, measured, with an accent that placed her somewhere in the mid-Atlantic corridor. "Mr. Vescari," she said, "I'm calling on behalf of the Ashcroft estate. My name is Constance Hale. I serve as chief counsel to the Dominion." Roman said nothing. "Lady Ashcroft has asked me to notify you of certain developments," Constance Hale continued, as though his silence were expected and allotted for. Her grandfather, Edmund Ashcroft, passed away 48 hours ago. She has assumed full control of the Ashcroft Dominion effective as of 6 a.m. this morning. In accordance with internal estate directives, all Ashcroft-affiliated assets connected to the Vescari syndicate have been placed in a temporary freeze pending review. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "How long?" Roman said. "The freeze?" "The review." "That's entirely at Lady Ashcroft's discretion." Roman pressed his back teeth together. "I want to speak with her." "I'm sure you do," Constance Hale said. There was no warmth in it, but no cruelty either, just precision. "Lady Ashcroft is not currently accepting calls from parties under review. I'll make note of your request in the file." A pause. "Have a good morning, Mr. Vescari." She hung up. Roman put his phone face down on the desk and looked at the window. Dawn was breaking across the city, thin and yellow, the kind of light that made everything look provisional. His second line rang almost immediately. It was Gianni Caruso, one of his 3 most senior lieutenants. Gianni's voice was tight in a way Roman had rarely heard. "Roman, you seen what's happening to our accounts?" "I'm aware." "The Palisade line just bounced. 60% of the Kellner Street renovation accounts are showing zero balance. Not insufficient funds, zero. Like the money was never there. I've got contractors calling me and I've got nothing to tell them." "I know." "Who's doing this?" Roman looked at the dawn. "I'm working on it." "Roman, if word gets out that our accounts are, it won't." "It already—" Gianni stopped. "Benedetto just called me. He's pulling his people out of the Eastern Corridor agreement. He said he got word that we're leveraged on air. His words." Benedetto Crane, one of Roman's longest-standing Allied operators. The man who had stood at Roman's right hand at 4 separate peace councils and sworn his loyalty as something structural, something that didn't depend on circumstance. "Get me Benedetto on the phone," Roman said. "I tried. He's not picking up for me." A pause that carried its own meaning. "He picked up for Marco Vieri this morning. I've got a man at Vieri's building, and he says Benedetto's car was out front at 7 a.m. Marco Vieri, who ran the Eastern Basin, who had been locked in a decade-long slow war with Roman over port access. Roman absorbed this. He thought about the jet. He thought about the Silver Crest. He thought about 17% of his operational capital tracing back to a woman he had signed divorce papers with less than 24 hours ago. A woman he had believed for 7 years was a florist's daughter from a small city he'd never visited, who collected succulents and read historical novels, and never once asked him about his work in a way that indicated she wanted an actual answer. He thought about that smile, the one at the end in the conference room just before she walked out. He thought about how it had unsettled him. Not tears, not anger, that calm smile, like someone checking the last item off a list they'd been keeping for a very long time. "Get me Silas," Roman said. Silas Moretti was Roman's chief advisor and the man who had been at his shoulder for 11 years. He was 61, precise, economical with words, and capable of the kind of long strategic patience that most men in their world never managed. He had helped engineer the Ferraro alliance. He had recommended the political marriage. He had, in fact, been the first person to suggest it. Johnny made the call and patched it through. Silas picked up on the second ring. "I heard," Silas said before Roman could speak. "Accounts are moving. I'm already on it." "Where are you?" "Coming into the building now. Give me 12 minutes. Roman watched the dawn finish spreading across the city. His hands were flat on the desk, very still, the way they got when he was controlling something that wanted very much to break out of him. 12 minutes, he thought. He'd been married to the wrong understanding of his life for 7 years, and he had exactly 12 minutes before his chief advisor walked through the door, and he had to decide, without complete information, how much of what he knew he was going to say aloud. The building's heating system clicked and ran. Outside, the first commuter traffic was beginning on the street below. Roman Vescari sat in the failing dark of his office, and for the first time in longer than he could recall, he didn't know what the next move was. The door to his office opened 8 minutes later, not 12, and Silas walked in, jacket already buttoned, reading something on his phone. The picture of a man arriving at a routine crisis he expected to be manageable. He looked up and saw Roman's face. For just a moment, barely a half second, the blink that wasn't quite a blink, something shifted behind Silas's eyes. Roman caught it. He'd spent 30 years learning how to read rooms and faces, and he caught it the way you catch something falling before your conscious mind has processed that it's in motion. Then it was gone. Silas settled into the chair across the desk with the ease of a man who had sat in that chair 1,000 times. "The Ashcroft name," Roman said. Not a question, not an accusation, just the name placed on the table between them. Silas's expression didn't change. "I've been pulling threads since 4 a.m. Whatever this is, it's significant. I want 48 hours to—" "Have you heard that name before?" Roman asked. "Before this morning." A beat. "In what context?" "Any context." Silas met his eyes with the steady calm of a man who had spent 40 years being unreadable in difficult rooms. "No," he said. "Should I have?" Roman looked at him for a moment that stretched. The city outside was fully bright now, indifferent and moving, and somewhere above it all, in whatever airspace a private jet with a silver crest now occupied, Alara Ashcroft was inheriting an empire that had been quietly threaded through Roman's entire existence, like rebar through concrete. "Start with the Benedetto situation," Roman said finally. "I want to know who reached him before we did, and what they offered." Silas nodded and reached for his phone, and Roman turned to the window, and neither man said what the room actually contained, which was the beginning of a question that would not be put back in its box, and the first cold intimation that something Roman had trusted with his life might not deserve that trust at all. Silas left the office at 8:14 in the morning, and Roman sat alone for 6 minutes before he moved. Then he opened the lower drawer of his desk, the one that didn't appear in the building's architectural plans, and took out a secondary phone, prepaid, unregistered. He used it 3 times a year at most, and the 3 people who had its number knew better than to call it for anything that could wait. He dialed Marcus. "You're on the clean line," Marcus said immediately. "Is this room clear?" A pause. Marcus had swept the office 2 days ago. Standard protocol, every 72 hours. It was clean Tuesday morning. "Sweep it again before I'm back in here, and do it yourself. Don't use Parrish." Parrish was the security technician who reported to Silas. Marcus understood the distinction without Roman having to draw a line under it. "Give me an hour." "You have 40 minutes." Roman stood and picked up his jacket. "And pull Silas's travel logs, quietly. Everything in the last 6 months. Hotels, cars, private transfers. I want to know every time he left the city without me knowing about it." "Roman," Marcus's voice was careful. "That's a significant ask." "I know what it is." Another pause. Okay, Marcus said, and that was all. Roman put the secondary phone in his inside pocket and left through the back corridor. Molt. He went to the one place he could think without walls closing in. The parking structure on Delaney Street, where he kept a car that wasn't registered to anything connected to his name. A gray four-door, 6 years old, nothing remarkable about it. He sat in the driver's seat without starting it and looked at the concrete pillar in front of him and let himself think. The Ferraro Alliance. Silas had brought it to him. 5 weeks ago, over dinner, the way Silas brought most things, methodically, the case already assembled, the conclusion already reached before the conversation began. A political marriage would resolve the Southern Corridor dispute. Camille Ferraro was the logical candidate. Roman was the logical husband. The divorce from Alara was the necessary precondition. Roman had agreed. He'd done it because it made strategic sense and because he'd believed, in the way you believe things that have never been tested, that Alara would be fine. That she had her settlement, her life, her quiet self-containment, and she would build something suitable with it, and they would move out of each other's orbits without incident. He had not asked her what she wanted. He realized now, sitting in the gray car in the Delaney Street structure, that he had never once in 7 years asked Alara Ashcroft what she actually wanted. He'd provided. He'd protected. He'd made decisions in her vicinity and handed her the results and assumed that constituted adequate attention. He pressed his knuckles against his mouth and stared at the concrete pillar. Then his primary phone lit up. Johnny. Luca Renner is at the South office, Johnny said when Roman answered. He showed up 20 minutes ago unannounced. Says he needs to speak to you directly. Luca Renner ran 3 of the most lucrative distribution routes through the western waterfront. He was precise, self-interested, and not the type to make unannounced visits unless the mathematics of his self-interest had shifted in a way that alarmed him. Tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes, Roman said. He started the car. Luca was waiting in the South office's front room, standing instead of sitting, which told Roman everything he needed to know about the man's current state before a single word was exchanged. Luca was 53 and had the kind of deliberately average face that made people forget they'd seen him, which had served him extraordinarily well for 3 decades. Right now, the face was tight around the jaw. Roman, he said. Luca. Roman sat down across from the empty chair, an implicit instruction. Luca sat. I'm going to be direct, Luca said. That would be efficient. 3 of my root investors pulled out this morning. Not reduced exposure. Pulled out. Full withdrawal of committed capital, effective immediately, penalties waived because they're not disputing anything, they just want out. 2 of them I've worked with for 8 years. Luca paused. One of them told me, before he stopped taking my calls, that he'd received a notification from an entity called the Ashcroft Meridian Trust, indicating that his investment position was under review and that maintaining it represented a conflict of interest with the trust's primary obligations. Roman kept his face still. I don't know what the Ashcroft Meridian Trust is, Luca said. I've never heard that name. But I know that in 14 hours, 3 embedded investors, 2 transit brokers, and now apparently Benedetto Crane have all moved in the same direction. And that kind of coordinated movement doesn't come from panic. That comes from instructions. He looked at Roman steadily. I need to know if you know what's happening. I'm working on it, Roman said. That's not an answer I can bring back to my people. It's the only one I have right now. Luca leaned forward slightly. Roman, I've been with you for 11 years. I'm not Benedetto, I'm not jumping ship for Vieri, but I have operations I'm responsible for and people who depend on those operations, and if the ground is moving, I need to know which direction to lean. A pause. Is this the Ferraro situation? Did the marriage deal go wrong? The Ferraro situation is intact, Roman said, because it was, technically, still intact. Camille Ferraro had not called. Her father had not called. The terms of the alliance had not been publicly disrupted. Yet. Then who is doing this? Luca asked. Roman looked at the wall behind Luca's head for a moment. Someone who has more reach than I initially understood. Luca absorbed that. He was smart enough to hear what was underneath it. Your ex-wife. Roman said nothing, which was confirmation enough. Luca sat back. He rubbed one hand across his jaw. The woman you just divorced. Yes. Roman. Luca's voice had gone somewhere between disbelief and a very specific kind of dread. What did you do? It landed differently than it was probably meant to. Roman heard it like an accusation from a part of himself he'd been suppressing since the 43rd floor. What did you do? Not what had she done, not what had happened to him. What had he done? Manage your people, Roman said. Keep the Western routes running. Don't make any commitments to outside parties until I reach out. Give me 72 hours. Luca stood. He wasn't satisfied, but he was disciplined, and discipline was worth more to Roman right now than satisfaction. 72 hours, Luca said. After that, I have to start making decisions based on what I can see, not what I'm waiting to hear. He left. Roman sat in the empty room and listened to the building settle around him. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, on the clean line. Ready? Come in through Alderton. Marcus had found something in 14 minutes less than the 40 Roman had given him. He laid it out on the work table in the secondary security room off the Alderton entrance. Printed pages, not digital files, because Marcus had learned from Roman that the things worth keeping private were worth keeping off servers entirely. Silas made 6 trips in the last 5 months, Marcus said. He pointed to the first page. 3 I could account for immediately: the Leon consultation, the Marchetti proxy meeting, the Hamburg freight review. All legitimate, all within his authorized scope. And the other 3? Marcus moved his finger to the second page. 1 to Geneva, under a personal travel ID I didn't know he had. 1 to Valletta, that's Malta, where he spent 4 days and met with at least 2 individuals I can't identify from the surveillance I was able to pull. And 1, he moved to the third page. 1 to a private residence outside Lausanne, 3 weeks before he brought you the Ferraro proposal. Roman looked at the photograph on the third page. It was grainy, taken at distance, but it showed Silas getting out of a car in front of a large house set back from a road behind iron gates. Standing at the gate, apparently waiting for him, was a man Roman had never seen before. Heavyset, 60s, wearing the kind of casual wealth that didn't need to announce itself. "Who's the man at the gate?" Roman asked. "I'm working on it. The residence is registered to a property management company that goes to a holding company that goes to another holding company." Marcus paused. "You see where this is going?" Roman saw. He'd been seeing it in expanding circles all morning. The Lausanne trip was 3 weeks before the Ferraro proposal, Roman said, 19 days before. Roman stepped back from the table. He pressed one fist against his mouth the same way he had in the parking structure, a habit he had when he was holding something in by force of will. He built the case for the marriage. He put the framework together. He brought me the Ferraro introduction. Yes. And I divorced Alara because of that framework. Marcus didn't answer. The answer was in the room without needing to be spoken. Roman dropped his hand. What does Silas get out of this? I don't know yet, but I can tell you what someone gets out of a Vescari-Ferraro alliance that breaks down at the wrong moment. Marcus set another page on the table. If the alliance collapses, if there's a public divorce from Camille Ferraro after the marriage, or if Roman Vescari is seen as unable to honor a political commitment, the Ferraro family retaliates. They don't negotiate. Dante Ferraro retaliates and takes the Eastern Corridor and 3 port access points. Meanwhile, your existing alliances are already eroded because your financial base has been destabilized. You're fighting on 2 fronts with a compromised treasury and allies who are calculating whether you're viable. He paused. Who steps into that vacuum? Roman looked at him. Whoever positioned themselves ahead of time, Marcus said. Whoever was already talking to the families that would benefit from the corridor opening up. Whoever had relationships with international operators who'd be interested in acquiring territory in a destabilized city. The man outside Lausanne, Roman said. My first guess, Marcus said. Roman picked up one of the printed pages. He looked at Silas's face, caught in a hotel surveillance frame in Geneva, clean and calm and utterly unremarkable. The face of a man on a business trip that was not the business trip he'd filed. 11 years. 11 years of Silas Moretti at his right hand, vetting information before it reached Roman, shaping context, assembling the strategic cases that became Roman's decisions. 11 years of absolute trust based on the fact that Silas had never, to Roman's knowledge, operated in his own interest at Roman's expense. To Roman's knowledge. "Don't move on him yet," Roman said. He set the page down. "Don't give him any indication that we're looking. I need more before I can confront him, because if I confront him without the full picture, he'll fill the gaps with whatever story serves him, and I'll never know what I missed." "Understood." Marcus hesitated. "Roman, if Silas built the divorce into this, if getting Alara out of your life was part of the architecture, I know. Then someone knew who she was. Someone knew what the Ashcroft connection meant before you did, and they removed her from your side before any of this started." Roman stood very still. "She wasn't an obstacle to your plans," Marcus said carefully. "She was protection you didn't know you had." The room was quiet for a long time after that. He called Stefan Brack back in the early afternoon and asked a question he should have asked 6 hours earlier. Which specific accounts had been frozen and in what sequence? Stefan read them out. Roman listened without writing anything down. He had always trusted his memory over paper, and when Stefan finished, Roman asked him to read the sequence again. The second time through, he heard it. The freeze had not started with the largest accounts. It had started with 3 specific operational funds, smaller ones, not immediately critical, the kind whose absence would take 12 to 18 hours to register as a problem rather than a glitch. Then the medium accounts. Then the primary operational lines. The sequence was designed not for maximum immediate damage, but for maximum psychological delay. You didn't know you were in crisis until you were already too deep in it to organize a clean response. Whoever had structured the freeze knew how Viscari Holdings operated internally. They knew which accounts were monitored hourly and which were checked at day's end. They knew the gaps in his oversight. That information did not exist in any public record. It existed in documents that had been prepared internally by his own financial team for internal review purposes. It existed in the operational briefings that went to Roman's senior staff on a quarterly basis. It existed in the briefings that went to Silas. Roman put the phone down and looked at the ceiling of the room he'd moved to. A secondary office 2 floors below the main one, unremarkable, rarely used. He breathed slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the discipline he'd learned at 22 from a man who told him the most dangerous emotion in a crisis wasn't fear or anger, but the desire to act before you were ready. His primary line rang, a number he didn't immediately recognize. He answered, "Mr. Viscari." A man's voice, accented, Eastern European, not placed precisely. "I apologize for the method of contact. I was given this number by a mutual party and told you were someone worth speaking to directly." "Who are you?" Roman asked. "My name isn't important. What is important is that I represent a consortium of parties who have a significant interest in the stability or instability of your city's organized infrastructure." A pause with something practiced in it. "We've been monitoring recent developments with great interest. The Ashcroft situation, the Ferraro alignment, the current disruptions." Roman's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "To offer you a conversation, an honest one, which I suspect you haven't had much of recently." Another pause. "Specifically, we'd like to discuss the terms under which certain territories might transition to new management in an orderly fashion before things become disorderly." Roman said very quietly, "You're calling to offer me a buyout of my own territory. We prefer the term transition arrangement, while my accounts are frozen and my allies are moving away from me." "Timing," the man said, and there was a smile in it, "is something we take very seriously." Roman pressed the phone hard against his ear and felt the red thing in his chest that he kept in a box most of the time move against the inside of its container. "Call this number again," he said, "and I will find you. And then you will have a problem that is substantially worse than timing." He ended the call. He sat in the chair for 30 seconds. Then he dialed Marcus again. "Trace the call I just received. Everything you can get. On it." Marcus paused. "Roman, there's something else. Just came in." "Say it." "I have a contact at the county records office. I asked him 6 hours ago to pull any filings connected to the Ashcroft name. Property, legal, anything that surfaced locally in the last 10 years. A pause. "He called back 20 minutes ago. Said he found one filing. From 8 years ago, 1 year before you met Alara. Roman went still. What kind of filing? A quiet title action, a property dispute basically buried in the municipal archives. The property in question was a building on Carano Street. That's where I have my primary office. I know. Marcus's voice was flat in the way it got when the information was bad. The building was in dispute 8 years ago between the previous owner and a holding entity. The holding entity that won the dispute and sold the building to the consortium that eventually sold it to you, that entity was called Ashcroft Property Holdings, LLC. Roman heard the sentence arrive. He heard what it meant. She was connected to the building before I bought it, he said. Before you met her, Marcus said, a year before. Which means someone connected to the Ashcroft Dominion had a position in the building that became my primary office before I ever had any relationship with that family. Yes. Roman sat in the unremarkable office 2 floors below his main one, in a building that he now understood he might not have acquired as independently as he believed, and felt the architecture of the last 7 years rearrange itself into a shape he didn't yet fully recognize. Was she planted? He asked. The question came out with less emotion than it deserved, because he was running out of room to put emotions and still function. I don't know, Marcus said honestly. I don't know if she was positioned next to you deliberately, or if it was coincidence, or if the building thing is unrelated. What I know is that nothing about the last 7 years is what it appeared to be. No, Roman said. It isn't. He ended the call. He put the phone face down on the desk. Outside, through the narrow window of the secondary office, he could see a slice of the city in late afternoon light, the kind of light that flattened everything and made distances hard to judge. He had built his entire life on the principle that information was power, that the man who knew more than everyone else in the room was the man who controlled the room. He had been confident for 30 years that he was usually that man. He was now 3 hours away from a call from Dante Ferraro. He could feel it coming, the way you feel weather before it arrives, in which Dante would almost certainly have heard something. About the frozen accounts, about Benedetto Crane, about the structural tremors running through Roman's operation. And Dante Ferraro was not a man who married his daughter to a trembling structure. If that call went wrong, the Ferraro alliance was finished. And if the Ferraro alliance finished, Dante would interpret it as a hostile act, and Roman would have a war on his southern border on top of everything else. Silas had brought him the Ferraro proposal. Silas had assembled the case for the political marriage. Silas had, 19 days after a secret meeting in Lausanne, delivered to Roman the exact sequence of logic that had led him to end his marriage to Alara Ashcroft. Roman thought about the half-second behind Silas's eyes that morning. The blink that wasn't quite a blink. His phone rang. Dante Ferraro. Roman closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then he opened them and answered. Dante, he said, and kept his voice level. Roman. Dante's voice was 60 years old and had the particular quality of a man who had never once in his life been uncertain about what he wanted. I'm calling because I'm hearing things I'd like you to tell me aren't true. What are you hearing? That your accounts are frozen, that Benedetto Crane had breakfast with Marco Vieri this morning, that you received a call from an Eastern European party offering territorial transition terms. A pause long enough to be deliberate. I'm hearing these things, and I'm sitting here looking at a marriage contract with your name on it, and I'm asking myself whether the man I'm about to bring into my family is a man whose house is still standing. My house is standing, Roman said. Then what is this that I'm hearing? A coordinated attack, one I'm addressing. From who? I'm still confirming the source. A longer pause, the kind that had consequences attached to it. Roman, I've respected you for a long time. I'm going to ask you directly. Is the Ferraro name at risk because of your current situation? Roman looked at the slice of city through the narrow window. He thought about saying no. He thought about constructing the sentence that would hold Dante in place for another 48 hours, while Roman rebuilt enough ground to stand on. Instead, what came out of him was something he hadn't planned. I won't lie to you about the degree of what I'm managing, because you're owed better than that. What I can tell you is that I will resolve it, and the alliance will hold. Dante was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed by a degree. less formal, slightly more human. My daughter has questions. That's her right. She's also more perceptive than people tend to give her credit for. Another pause. I'll give you 4 days, Roman. 4 days. And then I need to have a conversation with you in person. If that conversation doesn't satisfy me, I pull the contract. Understood. Don't make me regret the extension, Dante said, and hung up. 4 days. Roman set the phone down and looked at his hands. They were steady. They had always been steady, even when nothing else was, and he had sometimes been proud of that and sometimes found it faintly disturbing, like a body that didn't know yet that it was supposed to be in shock. His secondary phone buzzed. Marcus. Trace the Eastern European call, goes to a relay in Vienna. Working the next layer. But Roman, I found something on the Lausanne meeting. The man at the gate. I know who he is. Roman typed back. Who? 3 seconds. His name is Anton Kreis. He runs the logistics arm of the Drakonov cartel out of Bucharest. Specializes in territory acquisition in transitional markets. He's been buying into 3 European cities in the last 4 years. Each time, the local infrastructure collapses first. Each time, there's a figure inside the local operation who prepared the ground. Roman stared at the screen. Silas met with Kreis 3 weeks before he brought you the Ferraro proposal, Marcus wrote. I think the divorce wasn't a side effect of the plan. I think the divorce was the plan. Get Alara out. Isolate your finances. Destabilize the alliance. Let the city tear itself apart. And Kreis walks in to pick up the pieces. Roman sat in the secondary office in the building that an Ashcroft entity had quietly touched before he ever bought it, and read Marcus's words twice, and felt something settle in him. Not calm, not peace, but the specific cold clarity of a man who has finally located the shape of the thing that is trying to kill him. He had 4 days. He had a chief advisor who had spent 11 years inside his operation and 3 weeks ago sat down with a cartel logistics director in Lausanne and came home to engineer the end of Roman's marriage. He had a woman somewhere above the city in a private jet who controlled an empire that had been threaded through his life for longer than he'd known her, who had smiled at him in a conference room and walked out without looking back, and who was currently freezing every financial position connected to his name. And he had, somewhere in the rubble of everything he thought he understood about himself, the beginning of a question he didn't yet know how to ask her. He picked up the primary phone. He dialed a number he hadn't used in 7 years, the number Alara had given him in the early months of their relationship, before they married, when she was still calling herself a florist's daughter, and he was still believing her. It rang once. Then a voice he recognized as Constance Hale said, Mr. Vescari. Lady Ashcroft anticipated this call. She has one message for you. Roman waited. She said, when you know what Silas did to my grandfather, call again. The line went dead. Roman sat with the phone in his hand and the city outside the window and the weight of a sentence that had just opened a door he hadn't known existed onto a room that was darker and deeper than anything he'd prepared himself to enter. Roman didn't sleep that night either. He sat in the secondary office until 2 in the morning, and then he moved to the car on Delaney Street, and then he drove without destination for 40 minutes through the city's emptied streets because motion was the only thing that kept the pressure behind his eyes from becoming something he couldn't manage. He thought about Edmund Ashcroft. He thought about what Alara's message meant. When you know what Silas did to my grandfather, and he turned the sentence over the way you turn a stone you're not sure you want to look under. Edmund Ashcroft had died 48 hours before the divorce. That timing had registered as coincidence when Constance Hale first mentioned it. It did not register as coincidence anymore. At 3 in the morning, he called Marcus on the clean line. I need everything on Edmund Ashcroft's death, he said. Cause, location, attending physicians, who was present, whatever is findable. It'll take time. That kind of record, but I know. Start now. He drove back to the Delaney structure and sat in the gray car and waited for morning. Marcus called at 6:42 with what he had, which wasn't much but was enough. Edmund Ashcroft had died in his residence outside of Geneva, a private estate, staff of 12, medical team on permanent retention. Official cause of death was cardiac arrest. He was 81 years old and had a documented history of heart disease, which made the official cause unassailable on its surface. He had been found by his night attendant at approximately 2 in the morning, local time. The night attendant's name was not in any public record. Neither was the attending physician who certified the death. The estate itself was registered to an Ashcroft holding entity that had retained the same Zurich law firm for 40 years, and the law firm had issued a single brief statement confirming Edmund Ashcroft's passing and nothing else. "That's all the public record has," Marcus said. "What does the non-public record have?" A pause. "I reached out to a contact at the Interpol Financial Intelligence Division. Off the books. He owes me from the Bergen situation 2 years ago." Another pause. "He said the Ashcroft name flagged internally about 10 days ago, not because of Edmund's death, because of a separate matter. A financial instrument was triggered, a very large one. The kind that gets flagged when it moves because of the size and the velocity." "What kind of instrument?" He didn't have full detail, but he used the phrase succession protocol, like something that was pre-structured, waiting for a specific event to activate. Marcus let that sit for a moment. "Like a death." Roman stared through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking structure. "Someone knew Edmund Ashcroft was going to die," he said. Not a question. "Someone triggered a financial instrument connected to Edmund Ashcroft's succession 10 days ago, which is 2 days before he actually died." The silence that followed was total. "They pre-activated the succession protocol," Roman said slowly, "before the death, which means either they had foreknowledge of a natural death that was precisely timed, or they arranged the timing," Marcus said. Roman pressed the back of his head against the car seat. He breathed in, out, in. Silas Moretti had met with Anton Kreis of the Drakenov cartel, 19 days before bringing Roman the Ferraro proposal. Edmund Ashcroft had died 12 days ago, 6 days before the divorce, 2 days after someone pre-activated his succession protocol. Alara had inherited the Dominion and immediately frozen Roman's assets. The freeze had been structured with internal knowledge of Vescari Holdings' operational schedule. The architecture of it was becoming visible. Not all of it. There were still missing spans, load-bearing elements he couldn't see yet, but the shape was there. Silas hadn't just engineered a divorce, he had engineered a succession. He had arranged for the death of an 81-year-old man in Geneva so that his granddaughter would inherit an empire at precisely the moment she was being removed from Roman's side, leaving Roman exposed, isolated, and financially compromised at the exact moment the Drakenov cartel was positioned to move. Roman's jaw was so tight it ached. "Marcus," he said. "Yeah." "Where is Silas right now?" "In the building. He's been in his office since 7, acting completely normal." "Normal," Roman repeated. "Took a meeting with the Ferraro liaison at 7:30. Had coffee brought up at 8. He's got a call scheduled with the Eastern Corridor brokers at 10. Roman looked at his own hands on the steering wheel. Steady. Always steady. "I'm going to need you to do something for me that goes against everything we normally do." "Name it." "I'm going to need you to reach out to the Ashcroft Dominion on my behalf. To Constance Hale. Tell her that Roman Vescari has information regarding the circumstances of Edmund Ashcroft's death and wishes to share it with Lady Ashcroft directly. Tell her I'm not asking for a negotiation. Tell her I'm asking for 20 minutes. A long pause. "Roman, if Alara Ashcroft decides not to..." "I know. Do it anyway." He was back in the building by 9. He went in through the Alderton entrance again, nodded to the 2 men Marcus had stationed there, his people, not Silas's people, and took the stairs to the secondary office. At 9:47, Constance Hale called the clean line. "Mr. Vescari," she said, "Lady Ashcroft will see you, not by phone, in person. She'll send a location." "When?" "This afternoon, 2 o'clock. A pause. "She has conditions." "I expected that." "You come alone. No security, no recording devices, which we will verify before you enter. You have 20 minutes, as requested. If at any point during those 20 minutes Lady Ashcroft decides she's heard enough, the meeting ends." Another pause. "And Mr. Vescari, she asked me to tell you something before you agree." Roman waited. She said, "Come knowing that I already know most of it. I want to hear what you've figured out on your own." Her words exactly. Roman closed his eyes for a moment. "Agreed," he said. He spent the next 4 hours preparing what he knew and what he still didn't know, arranging it in the order that would make the most sense to a woman who, he was increasingly certain, had been several moves ahead of everyone in this situation for a very long time. The location came through at 1:15, a private club in the Aldrin district, the kind of place that didn't have a sign outside and wasn't in any directory, that existed purely through institutional memory and the kind of membership that was inherited rather than applied for. Roman had heard of it. He had never been inside. He arrived at 1:58. A man at the door, not a bouncer, something more precise than that, checked him with the scanner that Roman submitted to without comment. His phone was taken. He was led through a corridor lined with dark wood paneling to a room at the back of the building that was smaller than he expected, furnished with 2 chairs and a low table and a window that looked onto a private courtyard where nothing was growing yet in the late-season cold. Alara was already seated. She looked different. Not dramatically, she was wearing a dark suit that he didn't recognize, her hair down in a way she rarely wore it at home, and there was something in her posture that wasn't new exactly, but was no longer being moderated the way it had been for 7 years. She had always held herself with a certain careful quietness, and Roman had read that as her nature. He understood now that it had been a choice. She did not stand when he entered. "Sit down," she said. He sat in the chair across from her. The table between them was empty. No coffee, no water, nothing to occupy hands or eyes. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I haven't." She studied him for a moment. Her eyes were the same, that particular gray that shifted in different lights, but they were doing something he couldn't name. Not cold, not warm. Assessing. "What do you know about my grandfather's death?" she asked. "I know it wasn't natural," Roman said. "I know a succession protocol connected to the Ashcroft estate was triggered 2 days before he died. I know Silas Moretti met with Anton Kreis of the Drakonov cartel 19 days before he brought me the Ferraro proposal. I know the freeze on my accounts was structured with internal knowledge of my operational schedule that only exists in documents accessible to my senior staff." He stopped. Alara hadn't moved during any of this. "I know the Drakonov cartel has a pattern," he continued. 3 European cities in 4 years. Each time, an inside figure prepares the ground. Each time, the local infrastructure collapses first. I believe Silas is that figure. I believe he was tasked with destabilizing my operation, removing you from my side, and arranging your grandfather's death to trigger your succession at a moment when you were isolated and your financial empire was temporarily without its customary controls. He paused. I believe he intended to use your first days of inheritance as a window, that your initial actions, the freeze on my assets, were predicted and possibly engineered to look like the cause of my collapse, so that if anyone looked for an origin of the destabilization, they'd find your name on it. Alara was quiet for a moment. Almost, she said. Roman looked at her. You're right about Silas and Kreis. You're right about my grandfather. Her voice didn't change texture when she said that, but something around her eyes did, briefly, and Roman saw it. You're right about the succession protocol. What you're missing is why. Tell me. She leaned back slightly in the chair. My grandfather built the Dominion over 50 years. He was not a soft man. He made arrangements with parties that served the Dominion's interests, and he dissolved those arrangements when they stopped serving. Silas Moretti was not acting for the Drakonov cartel originally. He was acting for my grandfather. Roman went still. Silas was an Ashcroft asset, Alara said. He was placed inside your organization 11 years ago, at my grandfather's direction, to protect Dominion interests embedded in the Viscari Syndicate's financial structure. The room was absolutely quiet. Your grandfather, Roman said carefully, planted Silas in my organization. Yes. 11 years ago. Yes. Roman looked at the empty table between them. He looked at the window and the bare courtyard beyond it, and then he looked back at her face. And you? He asked. Were you? No. She said it with a precision that had some force behind it. I was not placed. I was not an asset. I met you at the gallery opening 3 months after the Carano Street property was sold, and it was not arranged, and I did not know for the first 2 years of our marriage who you actually were to my grandfather's organization." She paused. "When I found out, I chose to stay." "Why?" She looked at him with an expression that was, for a moment, entirely unguarded. "Because I had made a decision about you that was separate from my grandfather's calculations. And because I believed that if I stayed, I could moderate things, be a point of contact that kept the relationship from becoming purely transactional." She paused again. "I was also, if we're being honest, 28 years old and not fully rational about it." Roman absorbed this. "Your grandfather knew you'd stayed, and what I was to him." "Yes." "Did he know about us? That it wasn't arranged?" "He found out after the fact. He was not happy." A brief, complicated pause. "He was also, eventually, persuaded to accept it. He had a particular regard for situations that served multiple purposes simultaneously." She said it with the flatness of a woman who had had a long time to make peace with a complicated grief. Roman looked at his hands, then back at her. "When did Silas turn?" 8 months ago, Alara said. "My grandfather became ill, genuinely ill. The heart disease was real. And Silas began receiving contact from Christ. We believe Christ offered him something my grandfather couldn't anymore. Continuation. A place in the new structure after the transition. My grandfather's operation was contracting as he aged. Silas was facing obsolescence. So he flipped. He made a calculation," Alara said, in a tone that made clear she found the calculation contemptible without requiring her to say so. Roman stood up. He moved to the window because he needed to move. The chair was too still for what was running through him. He looked at the bare courtyard. A single dead tree near the far wall. A stone bench with a season's worth of dead leaves on it. "He killed your grandfather," Roman said. It came out flat. Not a question, not an accusation, just the act named aloud in a quiet room. "Yes," Alara said from behind him, "and arranged the divorce so you'd be separated from me at the moment you inherited, so that your first action as head of the Dominion would be to freeze my assets, which you did, because that's the logical protective move when your financial interests are connected to a destabilized operation. Yes, making you look like the cause of my collapse, which is what Christ will present to the other families when he moves to formalize territorial acquisition," Alara said. "The story will be that Roman Vescari's discarded wife took revenge by destroying his organization, creating a power vacuum that required external resolution." Roman turned back from the window. "He's going to move soon." "He's already moving." Alara stood now too and faced him across the small room. "Anton Kreis has booked a flight to this city for 36 hours from now. He has meetings scheduled with 4 of the 6 families that have already distanced themselves from you. He has a presentation prepared that outlines a territorial reorganization." She paused. "Silas is scheduled to deliver you to a council meeting tomorrow night. The invitation went out this morning. 7 family heads, neutral ground, crisis mediation. Standard protocol when a major operator is under stress." Roman's jaw tightened. "There's no council meeting." "There is a meeting," Alara said, "but it's not a mediation. It's a tribunal. Silas has already presented evidence, fabricated evidence, to 5 of the 7 family heads that you ordered the assassination of Councilman Devereaux." Roman felt the floor shift under him by a degree. "Devereaux is dead?" "Found this morning. Shot twice, staged to look like a professional hit with signatures associated with your organization." She said it steadily, the way you say something you've had time to prepare for. "Silas had him killed last night. He used 2 of your former men, people you let go 18 months ago, to execute it. Those men have since disappeared. The evidence chain will point directly at you." Roman stood in the center of the small room with that information landing on him in sequence, each piece finding the precise gap the previous one had opened. Devereaux, who sat on a neutral council that none of the families touched, because touching him was the one act that every family in the city had agreed, a decade ago, was an irrevocable declaration of war against all of them simultaneously. If Roman had killed Devereaux, if the families believed Roman had killed Devereaux, then every one of them was now in a state of sanctioned warfare against him. "Every family," Roman said. All 6 that Silas has already reached, Alara said. The 7th, the Pellini operation on the north side, hasn't responded yet. But 6 out of 7 is sufficient for what Christ needs. Roman looked at her. I walk into that council meeting tomorrow night, and I don't walk out. That is the intention, yes. And with me gone and the Dominion's assets frozen and the families in controlled war footing, Christ steps in as arbitrator, presents the transition framework. The families accept because it ends the war and preserves their individual territories under a new umbrella structure. She paused. They won't realize the umbrella is the Drekhanov cartel until it's too late to refuse. Roman was breathing steadily, but the steadiness was costing him something. He could feel it in his throat. He pressed the back of his knuckles against his mouth. That gesture again, that holding in, and looked at the floor for a moment, and then looked up at her. Your grandfather's people, he said, the network the Dominion has. Can any of it be moved quickly? Ilara's eyes were measuring him. That depends on what I decide to do with it. Ilara. Don't. She said it without heat. Don't start with what you need. Tell me first. Do you understand what Silas took from me? She let the question sit. Not the Dominion, not the assets. My grandfather was 81 years old, and he had 6 months left, possibly more, possibly less, and I would have been there for every one of those months. I would have had that time. Her voice didn't break. It remained exactly level, which was somehow harder to be in the room with than if it had. Silas took that. He made a calculation, and he took that from me so that Anton Christ could acquire a city. Roman stood there and didn't try to fill the silence with anything. Yes, he said finally, I understand what he took. Do you? She looked at him with those gray eyes that were doing their assessing thing. Because 4 days ago you signed papers that took something from me too. And you did it because Silas brought you a proposal, and you didn't ask a single question I hadn't already predicted you wouldn't ask. That one found its mark. Roman felt it land somewhere in his sternum and stayed with it. I didn't ask enough questions, he said, about a lot of things. No, she said, you didn't. Another silence. Outside, through the window, a bird landed on the stone bench and then left again. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Roman said. I don't have the right to ask that right now, and we don't have time for it regardless. He held her gaze. I'm asking if you're willing to stop this. Not for me, not for the syndicate, because if Christ gets what he's building toward, it isn't the families that suffer the long-term consequences. It's the city. The people who don't have private jets and Zurich law firms. The ones who live in the neighborhoods this infrastructure runs through. Ilara was quiet for a moment. I know that, she said. I've always known that. It's one of the reasons I stayed for 7 years. Then help me stop it. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that Roman became aware of his own breathing, shallow, tighter than he wanted it to be. I will help you stop Silas and Christ, she said finally, because it needs to be stopped, and because my grandfather deserves better than to have his death used as a lever in a cartel acquisition. Not because I've forgiven you, not because I want what we had back. Those are separate conversations for a time that isn't right now. She picked up a phone from the side table, a secure handset, he hadn't noticed it there, and held it. What I need from you first is information. Every operational detail Silas has access to, his communication channels, his financial accounts inside your structure, the names of every person in your organization who might be working with him. I'll give you everything. And Roman, she held his gaze, if at any point in what comes next you decide to revert to managing this in your usual way, unilaterally without telling me because you've assessed the situation and decided you know best, I walk away and you handle it alone. Is that clear? Clear, he said. She held out the handset. Then call Marcus. We have 31 hours before Christ lands. Roman reached out and took the phone, and their fingers didn't touch in the handoff. She'd made sure of that, a precise distance maintained, but he was close enough to see the faint tension in her jaw that told him what it had cost her to be in this room with him for the last 20 minutes, to be this controlled, this present, this functional, while carrying what she was carrying. He dialed Marcus. Get somewhere private, he said when Marcus picked up. I'm going to tell you everything, and then you're going to start moving it all to someone who is going to tell us what to do with it. Marcus paused. Someone being... Ilara, Roman said. A beat. the longest beat Marcus had ever given him. Understood, Marcus said, and for the first time in 36 hours, something in his voice sounded like something other than controlled alarm. Roman lowered the phone. Alara had moved to the window and was standing with her back to him, looking at the bare courtyard and the dead tree and the stone bench with its covering of old leaves, and her shoulders were set with a kind of precision that looked like it required maintenance. He had 23 minutes left of his 20 allotted, but he understood that the meeting, the real one, the one that mattered, had already started and would not end until either Silas Moretti was finished or they were. Then his secondary phone, the one they hadn't taken at the door because it was embedded in the lining of his jacket and the scanner frequency hadn't been calibrated for it, vibrated once. He looked at the screen. A text from a number he didn't recognize. 5 words and a photograph. The 5 words were, "We have Marcus. Stand down." The photograph was Marcus, seated in a chair in what appeared to be a parking structure. The Delaney Street structure, Roman recognized the concrete pillar, with 2 men standing behind him and a very specific look on Marcus's face that Roman had seen on exactly 2 other people in his life, and both of those people had not walked out of the rooms they'd been in. Roman looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. Then he looked up at Alara's back, still turned to the window, still carrying her controlled grief and her precise anger and her decision to help him stop a war she hadn't started. And he understood, with a cold and total clarity, that Silas had known about this meeting, had anticipated it, and had moved to cut off the one resource Roman had left before they could use it, which meant Silas also knew that Roman had figured out enough to be dangerous, which meant the 31-hour window had just collapsed into something dramatically shorter, and the next move could not be a mistake because there was no longer any margin left for one. Roman showed Alara the phone. He didn't explain it. He crossed the room in 4 steps and held the screen in front of her and let her read the 5 words and look at the photograph and form her own understanding without him narrating it. She looked at the image for exactly the amount of time it took to absorb it, no longer. And then she looked up at him. "How many people know you're here?" she asked. "Marcus. No one else." Then Silas had Marcus followed. She turned from him and picked up the secure handset and dialed a number without looking it up. "Constance. I need a location trace on a parking structure, Delaney Street. I need it in under 4 minutes. Yes, now." She lowered the phone. "How many men does Silas have direct control over inside your operation?" Roman ran it fast. "Parish and security. 2 of the 4 people in his intelligence unit. Possibly Gianni. I haven't confirmed Gianni, but the pattern fits." He stopped. 20, maybe 25 total, if he's called in external resources. "He has," Alara said. "Christ sent a team in 48 hours ago. 8 men, documented entry through the eastern freight corridor under a logistics cover. They've been staged at a warehouse on the Meridian Basin. You've been tracking Christ's people." "Since before my grandfather died," she said. "I knew something was moving. I didn't know all of it yet." A pause that carried something she didn't say aloud, the weight of almost having known enough in time. "Constance." She raised the phone again. "Send the Aldrin team to Delaney Street now. Full protocol. I want Marcus Hale extracted and secured." She listened for a moment. "Then take them from the secondary reserve. Do it." She lowered the phone. "You have a team here?" Roman asked. "I have 3 teams here," she said. "I've had them here since the day after the divorce." She met his eyes with the steady gray look that he was recalibrating, in real time, from what he'd thought it was to what it actually was. "I told you I knew most of it. I didn't come to this meeting without resources in place." Roman looked at her for a moment. "What do you need from me?" "Everything Silas doesn't know you know," she said. "His blind spots, his physical patterns, where he goes when he's managing something he doesn't want tracked." She paused. "He'll move tonight. The council meeting invitation went out this morning. If you don't show, he loses the frame. He needs you at that location. So he'll come for me directly if I don't appear to be walking in willingly." "Yes." "Then I appear to walk in willingly," Roman said. Alara looked at him. "That's the only way to get him in one place with his full attention committed." Roman's voice was flat, not reckless, the flatness of someone who had done the math and accepted the result. If I don't show as the council, he goes to ground and we lose him. If I show, we control the location of the confrontation. You'd be walking into a room where 6 family heads have been told you murdered Devereaux. Yes. Alone. Not alone, Roman said. You'd have your people outside. And I'd have the truth about Devereaux's assassination on record before I walked in. Documentation that Silas executed it with the former Viscari men. If that documentation reaches the family heads before the meeting concludes, it shifts the frame, Alara said slowly. She was thinking through it. He could see it. Not the impulsive processing of someone being convinced, but the structured evaluation of someone assessing a plan against variables she already had mapped. If the families receive authenticated evidence that the Devereaux assassination was Silas's operation, staged to frame you before they have a chance to act on Silas's narrative, then the tribunal becomes something else, Roman said, and Silas is in a room full of people who just realized they were manipulated. Alara set the handset down on the table. She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth, the first unguarded physical gesture she'd made in the entire meeting, and looked at the far wall. Christ lands in 29 hours, she said. We have to move tonight, Roman said, before he's here to manage the fallout. She was quiet for 6 seconds. He counted them. All right, she said. But I set the terms of the documentation release and I control the timing. You walk in when I tell you to walk in, not when you decide you're ready. And if at any point the room turns before the documentation lands, I get out. Yes. I can do that, he said, and mostly meant it. They worked for 3 hours in the back room of the Aldrin Club, at the low table between the 2 chairs, with Constance Hale patched in on audio, and 2 of Alara's analysts feeding information through the secure handset. Roman laid out every internal detail he had on Silas: access codes, communication protocols, the 3 secondary locations Silas used when he wanted to operate outside the building's surveillance architecture. Alara's people cross-referenced them against the tracking data they'd been accumulating and built a picture that was, Roman had to acknowledge, considerably more complete than anything he could have assembled alone. Marcus was extracted from the Delaney Street structure at 2:07. He was uninjured. Silas's people had been holding him as leverage, not processing him, and Alara's team moved him to a secure location outside the city before Roman was even told it was done. The efficiency of it settled into Roman's chest with a complicated weight. He was grateful. He was also, in some honest part of himself, confronted by what it meant that a woman he had believed for 7 years was a florist's daughter had deployed a 3-team security operation in his city in the 48 hours following their divorce. At 4:30, Roman texted Silas from his primary phone. I'll be at the council meeting tonight. Don't send people for me. Silas replied in under 2 minutes. Good decision. 8 p.m. I'll have a car. I'll drive myself, Roman wrote back. A longer pause. Then, understood. Roman showed Alara the exchange. She read it and handed the phone back. He'll have people at the location early, at least 6, probably more, positioned before the family representatives arrive. I know. The Pellini family still hasn't responded to the council invitation, Alara said, which means there's a 7th variable we don't fully control. She paused. I want to reach out to Pellini directly. Vincent Pellini is, Roman stopped, cautious. He doesn't take calls from people he doesn't know. He'll take a call from the Ashcroft Dominion, Alara said without particular emphasis, in the tone of someone stating a fact about the weather. Every operator in this city does. Roman looked at her. How long have you known about Pellini's connection to the Dominion? His father borrowed capital from an Ashcroft instrument in 1987 to survive a hostile acquisition of his northern port contracts. The Pellini family has maintained a quiet obligation since then. Vincent knows about it. He's never tested it because he's never needed to. She picked up the handset. Tonight he will. The council meeting was at a disused textile warehouse on the south waterfront, neutral ground by tradition, the kind of space the families used when they needed to assemble without any one party holding territorial advantage. Roman had been in it twice before, both times for actual mediation. He knew the floor plan. One large central space, loading doors on the east and west sides, a mezzanine level that ran along the north wall, a single point of entry through the main south doors. The mezzanine was the problem. Anyone with a rifle and the north wall at their back had a clean angle on anyone standing in the central space. Roman drove himself, as he'd told Silas he would. The gray car from Delaney Street. He parked 2 blocks east and sat for a moment with the engine off. His suit jacket was on. He had no weapon. Ilar's condition, and a reasonable one, since walking in armed would read as aggression to the family representatives and give Silas grounds to escalate before the documentation landed. He had his primary phone and the secondary embedded phone and a ceramic push dagger in his right shoe that she didn't know about and that he told himself was a last resort in the genuine sense rather than a planning variable. He got out of the car. The night was cold, the kind of cold that came off the waterfront and found the gap between your collar and your jaw. He walked the 2 blocks with his hands loose at his sides and his breathing deliberate. At 7:53, he pushed open the south door and walked in. The central space was lit by 4 portable work lights, the kind that cast a flat industrial white that turned faces into contrasts. 7 chairs had been arranged in a rough arc, 6 occupied, 1 empty. Roman identified the family representatives in the 2 seconds it took him to cross the threshold. Ferraro's man Benedetto was there, which meant Dante had sent a proxy. The others he recognized from years of negotiation and occasional warfare. 6 men who had all, in the last 24 hours, received evidence that Roman Vescari had ordered the execution of the one man in the city that no one was permitted to touch. The looks he got walking across that floor were not the looks of men attending a mediation. Silas was standing at the far edge of the arc, slightly apart from the chairs, in the position of a man who has organized the room rather than participated in it. He was in a charcoal suit. His hands were at his sides. His face was what it always was, measured, unreadable, the face of a man who had spent 61 years never letting anything show. He looked at Roman as Roman walked in, and Roman, for the first time since the gray car and the Delaney Street structure, let himself feel the full scope of what Silas had done, not the operational damage, not the strategic betrayal, but the personal arithmetic of it. 11 years. 11 years of proximity and trust, and the assumption that the man at his right shoulder was facing the same direction he was. He sat down in the empty chair. "Roman," Silas said, "thank you for coming." "Silas," Roman said. One of the family representatives, Caro, who ran the Western Basin independently and had no particular loyalty to anyone in this room, leaned forward. "You know why you're here. Tell me what you think you know," Roman said. "The Devereaux assassination," Caro said. His voice was not loud. Loud would have indicated he wasn't certain. He was certain. 2 witnesses place your former men at the location. A third places Vescari vehicles in the vicinity 3 hours before the shooting. The evidence was authenticated by Silas Moretti, who was Vescari's chief internal intelligence officer, which makes it particularly credible. He paused. Devereaux was untouchable. "I know what Devereaux was," Roman said. "Then you know what this means." "I know what Silas wants it to mean," Roman said. He kept his voice at the same register as Caro's, not defensive, not raised, factual. "I didn't order Devereaux's assassination. Silas Moretti did. With 2 former Vescari men he had already recruited before tonight's meeting was ever organized." He paused. "You're going to receive documentation of that in the next few minutes. I'd ask you to read it before you make any decisions." Silence. The kind that happens when 6 men in a room recalculate simultaneously. Silas moved, not dramatically, just a small shift of weight, almost imperceptible. Roman caught it the way he'd caught the half-second behind Silas's eyes in the office 2 mornings ago. "Roman," Silas said, with a tone that was patient and slightly sad, the tone of a senior man managing a junior one's credibility problem. "I understand you're in a difficult position." "Where's Anton Kreis?" Roman asked. The room changed. Not loudly, but Roman had spent 30 years reading rooms, and he felt the temperature drop by a degree across all 6 faces, and he knew that some of them had heard that name recently and not in a context they'd been comfortable with. "Kreis lands tomorrow," Roman said. "He has meetings scheduled with 4 of you for the day after. He has a territorial reorganization framework prepared. You're going to be offered stability in exchange for transitioning your operational independence to an umbrella structure that is, in reality, the Drakonov cartel's Western acquisition arm. He looked at each face in the arc, slowly, giving them time to register. Silas has been working with Christ for 8 months. He used your cooperation tonight, your willingness to believe I murdered Devereaux, to eliminate me before Christ arrives, so that there's no credible opposition to the transition offer. Once I'm gone, the city is already in managed conflict, and Christ steps in as the resolution. Another silence. Longer this time. Silas's voice came in beneath it. This is a desperate man inventing a narrative. Edmund Ashcroft is dead, Roman said, cutting through him cleanly. He was killed 12 days ago. The succession protocol on the Ashcroft estate was triggered 2 days before his death, pre-activated, meaning someone arranged the timing. Silas met with Anton Kreis in Lausanne 19 days before he brought me the proposal that led to my divorce from Alara Ashcroft. He paused. Alara Ashcroft is the sole heir to the Ashcroft Dominion. Her grandfather's death and her divorce from me were both elements of Silas's arrangement with Kreis. The divorce isolated her assets at a critical moment. Her grandfather's death forced a succession that Silas hoped to destabilize during its first days. He stopped. Every face in the arc was doing something different. Benedetto had gone very still. Caro's jaw had tightened. 2 of the others were looking at Silas. Silas looked at Roman with an expression that had finally, for the first time in 11 years, dropped the measured patience and shown something underneath it. It wasn't panic. It was the look of a man who has run a very long play and arrived at the moment where the play was either going to close or collapse, and who was making, in real time, the choice between a controlled retreat and a final escalating bet. He made the bet. Regardless of whatever narrative Roman is building, Silas said, addressing the room rather than Roman, his voice regaining its steadiness by apparent act of will, the evidence on Devereaux is authenticated and the council protocol is clear. Whatever other matters exist can be addressed separately. Tonight's question is singular. He raised his hand slightly. A signal. From the mezzanine above the north wall, Roman heard the click of a safety disengaging. From the east loading door, 2 men entered. From the west, 2 more. Silas had decided the documentation landing was a risk he couldn't absorb, and he was collapsing the meeting into a different kind of resolution. Roman stood up from the chair. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not clean. The first man from the east door covered half the distance to Roman before the south door came open, not with Roman's people, because Roman didn't have people, but with Vincent Pellini and 4 of his men, which was not what anyone in the room had expected, because Vincent Pellini had not responded to the council invitation, and his presence here was entirely unaccounted for in Silas's architecture. Vincent was 62 and moved like someone younger, and he looked at the mezzanine and the east and west doors and said, in a voice that was not raised but that carried, "Everyone with a weapon, put it down. The Ashcroft Dominion has authenticated records of tonight's meeting being transmitted in real time to 3 external parties. Anything that happens in this room is documented." He looked at Silas, including what was just attempted. The man on the mezzanine did not put the weapon down immediately. Roman was watching him, tracking the angle. The mezzanine rifle had a clear line to the chairs, which meant a clear line to Roman if he stayed where he was. He stepped left, putting a load-bearing pillar between himself and the north wall, and felt the impact of moving before his conscious mind had fully registered the decision. The rifle cracked, not at Roman, at Caro. It went wide, hit the concrete floor 2 feet to Caro's left, because the angle had shifted when Roman moved and whoever was on the trigger had miscalculated the adjustment. Caro threw himself sideways. The 6 chairs erupted into movement. Silas ran. He went for the west loading door, the one that still had 2 of his men in it, his intended exit point. And he moved with a speed that surprised Roman, because Silas was 61 and sedentary in his habits, and the speed came from somewhere that fear specifically unlocks. Roman went after him. He covered the floor of the warehouse in the space between 2 heartbeats, crossed the distance to the west door before Silas's men had fully processed the chaos behind them, and went through the door a half-second after Silas did. The west side of the warehouse opened onto a loading apron that dropped to the waterfront access road. Silas was already at the apron's edge, moving toward a parked car, black, waiting, engine running, and the driver was getting out, which meant he was coming to assist and not fleeing, which meant he was one of Silas's men and not simply a driver. Roman hit the driver before he cleared the car door. The impact went into his shoulder and the man's elbow simultaneously, and the elbow lost that exchange, and the driver went down against the car's frame with a sound that removed him from the equation. Roman kept moving. Silas reached the car and got the passenger door open, and Roman got there before the door closed. He got his hand into the door frame and pulled, and the door came back open, and Silas turned with something in his hand, a compact, the kind of weapon that wasn't meant for anything beyond 8 feet, and fired. Roman felt it before he understood it, a burning line across his left forearm, high, closer to the elbow than the wrist, a graze. The bullet had caught the outer edge of him as he turned his body on the pull and went into the car door's interior panel. He felt the heat of it and the immediate tightening of the arm, and he did not stop moving. He got his right hand on Silas's wrist. What followed was not a fight in any cinematic sense. It was 2 men in the opening of a car door, one of them with a gun and one of them with a better grip, and it lasted 11 seconds. And at the end of it, the gun was on the apron floor, and Silas Moretti was against the car with Roman's forearm across his chest and his back against the door, and Roman's face 6 inches from his. Roman's left arm was burning. He could feel the blood moving along it, not heavily but steadily, wetting the cuff of his jacket. Silas was breathing hard. His composure was gone. Fully, completely gone. And underneath it was the face of a man who had made a calculation that had failed and who was now doing rapid inventory of remaining options and finding them scarce. "It's over," Roman said. His voice came out with a roughness that surprised him. Not anger, something rawer than anger. "Tell me why you did it." Silas said nothing. Roman pressed the forearm harder. Edmund Ashcroft was 81 years old. Something moved through Silas's face. Not guilt. Silas was past the range where guilt was an available emotion. It was the look of a man being asked to account for a cost he'd already amortized. "He was dying anyway," Silas said. His voice was uneven, breath ragged, not its usual precision. 6 months, maybe less. Chris's window was now. Edmund would have resisted any Christ approach, and the Dominion's resources would have been mobilized against it. I moved the timeline. By killing him. By accelerating a conclusion that was already... By killing him, Roman said again, and this time Silas stopped talking. "What Christ offered me was viable," Silas said after a moment. Different tone. Quieter, more honest in the way that people get honest when the audience for a different version of the story has disappeared. "I've been running your organization's intelligence for 11 years. I know every asset, every relationship, every vulnerability. Christ needed that expertise in the new structure. I would have had a position, a real one, not..." He stopped. "Not the position you had with me," Roman said. Silas's jaw tightened. "You don't promote from within. You absorb and direct. Every person around you is a function, not a..." He stopped again. His breath was coming slightly short. Roman stood there with his forearm across the chest of a man who had been at his right hand for 11 years, and who had just told him, in as few words as possible, that he had arranged the murder of an old man and the destruction of Roman's life, because he had wanted recognition that Roman had not given him. He stepped back. Not because he was finished, because continuing to hold Silas against the car was a form of control that Roman no longer needed, and Silas no longer had the resources to break. "Don't run," Roman said. "There are Ashcroft security teams on this waterfront, and they will find you in under 3 minutes, and they will handle you in a way that I cannot control and would not be able to moderate." He paused. "Stand there. Wait for what comes next. That's the only option left to you that doesn't end badly." Silas looked at him. Something in his face went through several rapid transitions, calculation, rage, something that might have been a last-second reassessment, and then settled into a stillness that was, Roman recognized, the stillness of a man who had just accepted a conclusion. His left arm was bleeding steadily now. He could feel the sleeve soaked against his skin. From inside the warehouse came the sounds of the situation being managed. Voices, movement, the particular controlled noise of professionals processing an interrupted event. Through the west door, he could see Vincent Pellini's people moving with a competence that spoke of significant prior organization. His primary phone was vibrating in his pocket. He reached for it with his right hand. "Ilara," he answered. "The documentation reached all 6 family representatives 4 minutes ago," she said, "authenticated through 3 independent verification channels. Caro has already called his lawyer. Benedito is on the phone with Dante." A pause. "2 of the 6 have formally withdrawn their endorsement of the Devereaux framing. The other 4 are pending review." Another pause. "Roman, are you injured?" He looked at his left arm. The blood had reached his watch. "Minor," he said. "How minor?" "I'm standing in functional." A longer pause than he expected. "Where's Silas?" "In front of me." "Don't let him go," she said, and he heard in it something that was not entirely about strategy. "I won't," he said. Behind him, Silas had not moved. He was standing against the car with his hands at his sides and his face doing nothing, which was the face of a man who had used up every available version of himself and had nothing left to show. The waterfront was cold. Roman's arm ached with a deep, specific persistence that he kept in his peripheral awareness and away from the center where he needed to function. Somewhere on the access road, he could hear vehicles moving, Alara's people, or the family's people, or both, converging on the south side of the warehouse where the situation was consolidating. He held the phone against his ear and listened to Alara breathe on the other end of the line, and he waited for the next thing to become clear, and he did not let Silas out of his sight for a single second. Then headlights came around the north corner of the warehouse, 2 vehicles moving fast, not the measured approach of Alara's teams, but something with urgency in it, and Roman had time to register that the plates were not local before the first vehicle stopped and the doors came open, and the men who stepped out were neither Alara's people, nor the family's security, nor anyone Roman recognized. 4 of them, equipped in a way that went beyond personal protection. Moving with a coordination that was trained and recent and specific. Crisis people. The ones who had been staged at the Meridian Basin warehouse for 48 hours waiting for exactly this kind of contingency. Roman looked at Silas. Silas looked at the 4 men and something changed in his face. Not relief, which would have been the logical response if these were his reinforcements, but something closer to alarm, which told Roman in the space of a half-second that Silas was no longer in a position of command with crisis people, that he had become, in the course of the evening's failure, a liability rather than an asset, and that the 4 men stepping out of those vehicles were not here to extract him. Roman dropped the phone and moved. He went left, away from Silas, away from the car, putting distance between himself and the convergence point, because staying still was the only option that was definitely wrong. His left arm screamed at the motion, and he ignored it completely. He reached the edge of the loading apron and went over it, a 6-foot drop to the access road below, and hit the ground on both feet and kept moving, because stopping was not a choice he had. Behind him, he heard 1 shot, then silence, then shouting in a language that was not English. He did not look back. He ran along the access road with the waterfront to his left and the warehouse wall to his right, and his left arm pressed against his body, and his blood pressure in his ears, like a second heartbeat that was louder than the first. And somewhere ahead of him in the darkness, Alara's teams were supposed to be, and he was running toward that supposition with everything he had left, because it was the only direction that made sense, and because the alternative to reaching it was something he was not prepared to accept. The access road curved, and the warehouse wall ended, and the open waterfront spread out ahead of him, dark and enormous, and there were lights at the far end of it, vehicle lights, the kind that belonged to organized people rather than panicked ones, and he ran toward them. 20 meters. 15. 10. A figure stepped out of the light, and he almost changed direction before he recognized her. Alara, not behind a handset, not in the back room of a private club, but physically here on the waterfront, her dark suit coat replaced by something heavier, her face in the industrial light from the vehicles doing something he had not seen on it before in 7 years. He covered the last 10 meters and stopped in front of her, and his breath was wrecked, and his arm was soaking through the jacket sleeve, and he couldn't immediately identify which of these facts was more pressing. Alara looked at his arm. Then she looked at his face. She reached up with both hands, precise, practical, without ceremony, and pressed her palm hard against the outside of his arm just below the elbow, and the pressure was immediate and competent, and it hurt, and he didn't move away from it. Crisis people, he said between breaths. At the warehouse, north side, 4 of them. I know. Her eyes were on his face. My team has them contained. A pause. Silas? I don't know, he said honestly. I heard one shot. Her face did something very small and very controlled, and she turned to the person standing behind her. A woman, 40-something, earpiece, the build of someone who had spent professional years making herself capable of things, and said 2 words quietly, and the woman moved away immediately.
Then Alara turned back to Roman and kept her palm on his arm, and they stood there on the cold waterfront in the industrial light, with everything still moving around them and not quite finished. And Roman looked at her face and said, without planning to say it, "He told me he killed your grandfather to accelerate a conclusion that was already coming." Her jaw moved once. "I know," she said. "I heard." She glanced down at the phone on the ground where he'd dropped it. Its screen cracked, but still lit. "I heard all of it." Roman looked at the phone, then back at her. The press of her palm against his arm was the most direct physical contact they had had since before the conference room on the 43rd floor. And it was medical and practical, and she was doing it because he needed pressure on the wound and not for any other reason. And he understood that, and he stayed in it anyway because it was what the moment contained, and he had no remaining capacity to manage it into something more controlled. "It's not over," he said. "Christ still lands in 27 hours. "I know," Alara said. "And the family council is in pieces, and Silas may or may not be alive, and Dante Ferraro is going to need—" "I know," she said again. And there was something in the second repetition that was not dismissal, but was the tone of someone who had already mapped the next 48 hours and needed him to stop talking for 30 seconds so they could both breathe. He stopped talking. The waterfront was cold and vast, and behind them the warehouse lights were still on, and somewhere in the distance a siren was beginning, moving toward or away from them, impossible to tell. Alara's hand was still on his arm. Her eyes were still on his face. And Roman Viscari stood on the dark waterfront with his blood on her palm and everything still unresolved, and looked at the woman he had signed divorce papers with 4 days ago and understood, with the specific clarity that only arrives when every other layer has been stripped off, that the accounting between them was far from settled and that the most important reckoning he had left to face was not Anton Kreis. The medic was one of Alara's people, a compact woman named Reyes who worked without commentary and carried her kit in a flat black case that looked like a laptop bag. She had Roman's jacket off and the sleeve of his shirt cut to the elbow inside 90 seconds, working under the vehicle's headlights with the efficiency of someone who had done this in worse conditions with less light. The wound was a deep graze, not a through and through, not embedded, but the tissue along the outer forearm had been opened for 4 inches and it required closure. Reyes worked with adhesive strips and compression wrap, while Roman sat on the edge of the vehicle's running board and watched Alara 30 feet away, talking into her handset with her back partly turned, her free hand moving in the small controlled gestures she used when she was coordinating rather than reacting. "Hold still," Reyes said without looking up. Roman held still. From the warehouse, Alara's teams were bringing the situation into a final shape. Kreis's 4 men had been contained at the north side, disarmed, secured, their communications cut. 2 of the family representatives had already been escorted from the building by their own security. The others were still inside with Vincent Pellini's people managing the space, which meant Vincent had committed fully to this side of the equation, which was either because of the Ashcroft obligation or because Vincent Pellini was a man who could read a room and understood that the room had decisively changed. Silas had not been found yet. That single fact sat in Roman's chest like a sliver of metal, not large enough to be immediately dangerous, too specific to ignore. Alara walked back to him while Reyes was finishing the wrap. She looked at the closed wound with a clinical assessment that was not warmth and not its absence either, just the look of someone determining whether a variable was still a problem. "Kreis's 4 men are being processed," she said. "We have their communications. Kreis himself is still in Bucharest. His flight is booked for 6 a.m. local, landing here at 14:10 tomorrow." She paused. "I've already contacted the aviation authority through a Dominion instrument. His landing clearance is under review on a customs compliance flag. That buys us additional time if we need it." "Can you hold it?" For 48 hours, reliably. After that, it becomes a diplomatic instrument, and those have limits. She looked at his face. How are you? The question was direct and practical, not tender, and he answered it in the same register. Functional. The arm is manageable. She nodded once.
Silas, he said. I know. She turned slightly and spoke to the woman with the earpiece, the one she'd dispatched when Roman said he didn't know what had happened at the car. The woman shook her head once, a small, precise negative. Elara turned back. The shot we heard, it wasn't Silas. One of Christ's men fired at the car and missed.
Silas ran during the confusion, a pause that had a specific quality to it. He's on foot in the waterfront district. We have a perimeter, but it's not complete. Roman stood up from the running board. Reyes stepped back without being asked. He knows this waterfront, Roman said. He ran logistics through here for 3 years when we had the port contracts. He knows every access point, every dead zone in the surveillance grid, He stopped. Something assembled itself out of the information already in his mind. The old Carano freight office, on the east side, past the third dock. It's been empty for 4 years, but the structure is intact, and Silas inspected it twice when we were considering reopening the contract. He knows the layout. He knows there's a service tunnel that runs under the second dock to the municipal drainage access. Elara looked at him steadily. If he reaches that tunnel, he's out of the perimeter, Roman said. And Christ has a secondary contact in this city, someone who isn't one of the 4 men we just contained. Someone local, pre-positioned. If Silas reaches them, he rebuilds enough to run, Elara said. Yes. She made the decision in approximately 2 seconds and turned to the woman with the earpiece and gave her the location in 4 sentences, clean and exact. The woman was on her radio before Elara finished speaking. Roman was already moving toward the east access road. Roman, Elara's voice behind him. Not a warning, a statement of fact that required a response. You're injured and you don't have a weapon. I know where he's going, Roman said. He didn't stop. And I'm not sending someone else. He heard her footsteps behind him, not the footsteps of someone following at a distance, but someone matching his pace exactly. And he didn't tell her to stay back because he understood, in the place where he'd stopped managing things unilaterally, that it wasn't his call. The Carano freight office was a 2-story brick structure that had been purpose-built for a shipping operation that no longer existed, and in 4 years of vacancy, it had acquired the particular quality of abandoned industrial spaces. Not decayed exactly, but hollowed, like a structure that had forgotten what it was for. The windows on the ground floor were boarded. The door on the east face had a padlock that had been cut. Recently, the metal still bright at the break. Roman pushed the door open and went in. The ground floor was large and dark, the only light coming through gaps in the boarding and a broken skylight 2 floors up that let in a stripe of cold waterfront air. Wooden shipping pallets stacked along the west wall. A metal staircase on the north side going to the mezzanine level. The smell of rust and salt water and something organic that had been here long enough to become part of the building. Elara was 2 steps behind him. She had a torch. From Reyes's kit, or her own pocket, he didn't ask. She kept it low and angled, enough to navigate without advertising their position. They crossed the ground floor without speaking. The service tunnel access was behind the north staircase. A metal hatch set into the concrete floor, heavy, the kind that required effort to lift. It was up. Hinged back against the stair support, the tunnel below it open and dark. Roman crouched beside the hatch and listened. Footsteps. Below, moving away. The specific rhythm of someone moving as fast as they could in a confined space without being able to run. Short, quick steps, the sound slightly wet, which meant the tunnel floor had water in it. He looked back at Elara. She was watching him with the torch angled away from the hatch so the light didn't go down. The tunnel is 60 feet, he said very quietly. It opens into the drainage junction under the second dock. From there, he can access the municipal system and come up anywhere in a 4-block radius. My team is covering the municipal access points, she said, equally quiet, but not all of them. There are 7 in that radius and I have 4 people. Roman looked at the open hatch and the darkness below it. Then he went in.
The tunnel was 4 feet across and 5 feet high and smelled of salt water and old concrete, and the water on the floor was 2 inches deep and cold enough that he felt it through his shoes immediately. He moved as fast as the space allowed, bent at the waist, his right hand on the curved wall for orientation, his left arm held slightly away from his body because the compression wrap needed to stay in place, and the tunnel wall would tear it. Behind him, Alara's torch. She was in the tunnel. He hadn't told her to stay above, and she hadn't asked permission, and they moved through the dark in single file without discussing it. 30 feet in, the footsteps ahead of him changed. Closer, or louder, or both. Silas had stopped. Roman slowed. His own footsteps, water-muffled, dropped to near silence. He pressed against the right curve of the tunnel wall and breathed through his mouth so the sound was minimal. A scraping sound ahead. Metal on concrete. Silas was at the junction hatch. Roman moved. He covered the last 30 feet in the dark by feel and velocity and came into the junction space, larger than the tunnel, high enough to stand, a convergence point where 3 tunnels met in a rough circle, and found Silas at the hatch on the far side, both hands on the wheel lock, turning it. "Silas," Roman said. Silas stopped turning the wheel. He didn't turn around immediately. He stood with his hands on the lock for a moment that had the weight of a very long history in it. Then he turned. In the darkness of the junction, with Alara's torch now at the tunnel entrance behind Roman, Silas's face was a composition of shadow and the specific exhaustion of a man who has been running for an hour on 61-year-old legs after a life of sedentary precision. His suit was ruined, his shoes were soaked, his hair, always ordered, was not. He looked at Roman and said nothing. "There are 4 people at the municipal access points," Roman said. "You won't get through all of them." 3, Silas said. His voice was stripped of its usual management, just the bare mechanism of it. "I counted the vehicles when I was above. You have coverage on 3. The 4th is covered by a method that isn't a vehicle," Alara said from the tunnel entrance. Her voice was calm. "Surveillance, not personnel, which means you'll get through it and be photographed doing so, and the image will be transmitted to 6 parties in under 90 seconds. A pause. "You have nowhere to go, Silas." Silas looked at her. It was the first time he'd seen her since the conference room on the 43rd floor. Roman realized that, tracking it. They had not been in the same space since the day she walked out. "Lady Ashcroft," Silas said. He said it with a tone Roman couldn't fully read, something between formal acknowledgement and bitter irony. "You killed my grandfather," Alara said. Just that. No escalation in it, no performance. The statement placed in the space between them like something that didn't need decoration. Silas looked at her for a moment. "Edmund Ashcroft made the same kinds of decisions I made," he said, "for 50 years. The difference between us is that his were called strategy, and mine are called—" "He didn't kill anyone who trusted him," Alara said. Silas's jaw moved. He looked away. At the junction walls, the wet floor, the 3 tunnel openings. The look of a man taking inventory of a space and finding it insufficient. "I trusted you," Roman said. Silas looked back at him. 11 years, Roman said. "Whatever you believed about how I treated you, and maybe you were right about some of it. I'm not standing here telling you every call I made was correct. You had 11 years to say any part of what you told me tonight. You didn't. You went to Lausanne instead." He paused. Edmund Ashcroft was 81 years old, and his granddaughter deserved those last months. Something in Silas's face moved in a way that Roman had never seen on it. Not guilt, still, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who has amortized a cost, and then been forced to look at it as a specific thing rather than a line in a calculation. "What happens now?" Silas said. "You come out of this tunnel," Roman said, "and you answer every question Alara's people and the family council have for you, completely, including the Christ operational structure, the contact network, the financial instruments." He paused. "If you do that, I can make a case for a resolution that doesn't involve the families taking their own kind of accounting. And if I don't," Roman looked at him steadily, "then I step aside and I don't make that case." The tunnel junction was quiet except for the water moving along the floor and the distant sound of the waterfront above them.
Silas looked at Alara. She returned the look without expression. He let go of the wheel lock. They brought him out through the freight office and into the cold waterfront air, and Alara's people took him with the impersonal efficiency of professionals who had processed difficult individuals before. Roman watched them go and stood in the freight office doorway with his left arm aching through the compression wrap and the night air coming off the water and doing nothing about any of it. Alara stood beside him, not close, the distance she'd maintained since the club in the Aldrin district, deliberate, measurable, the physical syntax of someone who knew exactly what she was communicating and was communicating it precisely. "The council," Roman said. "Caro has already issued a formal withdrawal of the Devereaux framing. In writing, witnessed. The other 5 will follow by morning. Silas's credibility is finished and the documentation we released is comprehensive." She paused. "Dante Ferraro called during the tunnel. He's sending Benedetto to a direct meeting tomorrow morning." "To cancel the alliance," Roman said. "I don't know yet. He didn't say." She glanced at him sideways. "He also asked about you. Specifically whether you were going to be available for the meeting or whether he should send his lawyers instead." Roman processed that. "He asked if I was alive." "Essentially." A pause. "I told him you were injured but functional. He said—" She stopped briefly. "He said, 'Good, because I want to talk to him directly, not to a funeral.'" She paused again. "I think Dante Ferraro may be reconsidering more than the alliance terms." Roman looked at the dark water. A light moved far out. A freighter, unhurried. The kind of vessel that moved through the world on its own schedule, regardless of what the people on shore were doing. "Kreis," he said. "I'll handle Kreis," Alara said. "His landing clearance will be permanently revoked through a Dominion instrument by 8 a.m. He'll be detained for customs review in Bucharest, and the documentation of his operational involvement here will be in the hands of 3 separate international financial intelligence bodies before he finishes the interview." She paused. "His consortium's assets in this region are already being unwound. The investors Silas connected him to are being contacted with authenticated records of the territorial acquisition scheme. By the time Kreis is released from customs review, he will have nothing left in this city to acquire." Roman turned to look at her. "You had all of this prepared before tonight." "I had the framework prepared," she said. "I was waiting to see which direction the night went before I activated it." "What would you have done if tonight had gone the other way?" She looked at him for a moment. "I would have activated it anyway," she said, "and handled the rest of it without you." A pause. "That was always an option." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "I know it was." The freighter light moved slowly across the dark water and disappeared behind the warehouse structure. "There's something you don't know yet," Alara said. Her voice had shifted, not softer but differently weighted. She was looking at the water now, rather than him. "About your father." Roman went still. "My grandfather kept records," she said. 60 years of records on every significant relationship the Dominion had. I've been going through them since I took control." She paused. "Your father, Victor Viscari, had a relationship with the Dominion that predated your birth. Not a financial relationship." She stopped again, choosing the words carefully. 28 years ago, when my grandfather's operation was under external threat, a hostile attempt by a consortium of European operators to force a leveraged acquisition of several Ashcroft instruments, Victor Vescari intervened, directly. He used his reputation and his relationships to discredit 2 of the consortium's principals at a critical moment. It cost him, significantly. He was accused publicly of financial impropriety he hadn't committed. The accusations were never fully resolved, and the damage to his personal reputation followed him for the rest of his life. Roman was very still. "He did it because my grandfather asked him to," Alara said. "And because—" She paused. "Because I was 4 years old and my parents had died that year, and my grandfather had told Victor that the acquisition, if it succeeded, would destabilize the instruments that held my inheritance in trust. Victor Viscari sacrificed his public reputation to protect the financial security of a 4-year-old girl he had never met. The waterfront was very quiet around Roman. My grandfather never told me, Alara said. I found it in the records 3 days ago, 2 days after I froze your accounts. She turned to look at him. I want you to know that finding that record is part of why I agreed to meet you. Not the only reason, but part of it. Roman looked at her face in the dark and thought about his father, a man who had died when Roman was 19, whose public reputation had carried a stain that Roman had spent his adult life quietly trying to understand and never been able to fully account for. A man who had been, by Roman's recollection, deeply private about certain parts of his history. A man who had told Roman once that the decisions worth making were usually the ones that cost you something real. He never said anything, Roman said. His voice came out rough in a way he didn't manage. No, Alara said. He wouldn't have. They stood together in the freight office doorway for a while after that, not speaking, the water moving and the cold coming off it and the night doing what nights do, continuing, indifferent to the weight of what was being carried inside it. In the weeks that followed, things resolved in the way that large, complicated things resolve. Not cleanly, not all at once, but in a series of smaller settlements that gradually changed the shape of the landscape. Silas Moretti cooperated completely. He gave the family council 7 hours of testimony that dismantled every element of the Kreis operation and identified the local contact, a mid-level transit broker named Pharaoh, who had been passing operational intelligence to the Drakonov network for 14 months. Pharaoh was processed by people who didn't leave records of their processing. The council accepted the testimony and closed the Devereaux matter with a formal finding that cleared Roman's name, delivered in the particular private language of people who do not issue public statements. Silas himself was handled by an arrangement that Alara's lawyers structured and Roman did not obstruct. He was removed from the city permanently, his assets in 3 jurisdictions frozen under an Ashcroft instrument, his movement restricted to a monitored geography that was comfortable enough to be livable and confined enough to be effective. Roman was not asked to sign anything in connection with this arrangement, and he didn't ask to. Some accountings were not his to participate in. Anton Kreis spent 11 days in Bucharest customs review and emerged to find his regional operation in a state of comprehensive unwinding. The 3 international bodies that had received documentation of the territorial acquisition scheme were not fast-moving institutions, but they were thorough, and thoroughness served the purpose. Kreis returned to Bucharest and did not attempt to re-enter. The Drakonov cartel, which had interests in continuing to operate in European markets that it valued more highly than this particular acquisition, declined to pursue the matter further. The city was not worth the cost of the attention. Dante Ferraro met with Roman on a Tuesday morning in a restaurant that was closed to the public for the occasion. The meeting lasted 2 hours. What was said in it was said only between the 2 of them and 2 lawyers who had been in the business of discretion for long enough to have made it structural. The political marriage was dissolved by mutual agreement and without acrimony, because Dante Ferraro was, underneath the 60 years in the organization and the particular kind of authority that had made him what he was, a man who valued clarity over ceremony. He said one thing to Roman at the end of the meeting, standing in the restaurant doorway with his coat on. Your father was a man I respected. I've always thought you were more like him than you knew. Do something with that. Roman drove back from the restaurant alone and did not immediately return to the office. The Vescari syndicate began its own transformation slowly, in the way that large structures change, weight shifting, load-bearing elements rebalancing, the external shape maintained while the interior was rebuilt. Roman dissolved 3 of the organization's most violent operational arms in the first month, not with announcement or ceremony, but with the quiet, methodical work of someone who had decided what the next version of the thing needed to look like and was prepared to do the construction himself. The legitimate holdings, real estate, logistics, international trade instruments, were restructured under an oversight arrangement with the Ashcroft Dominion that was neither a merger nor a subordination, but something more precise, a formal acknowledgement that these things were connected and that the connection should be legible rather than hidden. The restructuring took 3 months of sustained work and required Roman to be in the same rooms as Alara's lawyers, and occasionally Alara herself, with regularity and purpose. He did not use these occasions to advance anything personal. He arrived prepared, conducted the business, and left when the business was concluded. He understood, without being told, that any ground between them that was going to be rebuilt would be rebuilt at a pace she controlled and not one he proposed. He thought about his father often in those months. He thought about the 4-year-old girl in the records and the man who had made a decision that cost him something real and never said a word about it. He thought about what it meant that his entire life had been shaped in part by a sacrifice he hadn't known existed, made for a person he hadn't yet met, by a man who apparently understood something about obligation that Roman had been working his way toward for 30 years. One evening in the 4th month, he was in the secondary office working through a restructuring document when his phone lit up with a message from a number he recognized now as one of Alara's direct lines. Not the formal Dominion channels, but the personal one she'd begun using when the restructuring made direct communication more efficient than routing through lawyers. The message said, "The Edmund Ashcroft Memorial Endowment documents need a co-signature from the Viscari restructuring instrument. Can you come to the Aldrin offices tomorrow at 3? He typed back, "Yes." Then, after a moment, he added, "How are you?" A longer pause than the efficiency of the exchange required. Then, "Better than 4 months ago. You." He looked at those 4 words for a moment. "Same," he typed, which was true and insufficient, and the right amount for right now. So, the endowment signing was at 3 o'clock the following afternoon, in one of the Aldrin offices that was not the small back room, but a larger working space with a conference table and 4 lawyers and enough documentation to occupy 45 minutes of sustained attention. Roman signed where he was asked to sign. Alara signed across from him. The lawyers organized the documents. The endowment, a significant capital instrument structured to fund educational programs in 3 districts of the city that had historically been underserved by institutional investment, was formally established in Edmund Ashcroft's name. When the lawyers filed out, Alara remained at the table for a moment, organizing her copies of the documents with the focused attention she gave to physical tasks, the same focus she'd given to the hospital paperwork in the early years of their marriage when Roman was recovering from a shoulder injury, and she had handled everything quietly and completely, and he had not, at the time, fully registered what it was to have someone do that. He registered it now. "The endowment will distribute its first grants in 6 months, she said, without looking up from the documents. "I know. Stefan has the disbursement schedule." She finished organizing and set the papers down. She looked at the far wall for a moment, a brief look, private, the kind you don't perform for an audience, and then she looked at him. "My grandfather would have argued about the name," she said. "He didn't like having his name on things. He thought it was a form of vanity that drew attention to infrastructure that worked better when it was invisible." A pause. "But he also believed in the work, in the district specifically. He grew up near the Kellner Street area, which almost no one knew." She paused again. "I wanted him to have something visible, even if he would have argued about it." "It's the right call," Roman said. She looked at him in the direct way she had, that gray-eyed assessment that he understood now was not reserve but acuity. "Yes," she said, "it is." A silence that was not uncomfortable. The office around them was working hours quiet. The building systems, a distant phone somewhere, the specific texture of a space that had purpose. "I owe you a conversation," Roman said. "Not today. When you're ready for it. About the 7 years and about the divorce and about the things I didn't ask and didn't see." He held her gaze. "There's no frame I can put on it that makes it smaller than it was." Alara was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "There isn't." She picked up her copy of the documents. "But I'm aware that it's a conversation that exists, and that you know it exists." A pause. "That's different from 4 months ago." "Yes," he said. "It is." She stood and gathered her coat from the chair back. He stood too, the reflex of it automatic, and she caught the gesture, and something in her expression moved in the small private way that happened sometimes now. Not often, not offered freely, but present. "The Ashcroft jet is flying to Geneva next Thursday," she said, shrugging on the coat, "to finalize the estate documentation at the Zurich firm. I'll be there for 2 days." She didn't look at him while she said it, attending to the coat's buttons with the focused precision she gave to physical tasks. "The restructuring instrument needs a Vescari signature on 2 of the estate documents. It would be more efficient if the signatory was present rather than routing through couriers. Roman looked at her. She looked back at him, coat buttoned, documents under her arm, the gray eyes doing their assessing thing, and also, underneath it, something that was choosing to be said in this way rather than a more direct one because she was Alara Ashcroft, and she had spent a long time being precise about the distances she kept, and she was measuring in real time how much of that distance to adjust. "I can arrange that," Roman said. "Good," she said. "I'll have Constance send the itinerary." She walked to the door. At the threshold she paused. Not the pause from the 43rd floor, not the one that had meant a door closing. A different kind. The kind that means something is being given a moment before the next thing begins. "Roman," she said, with her back still slightly to him. "Yes." "Your father was a good man." She said it simply, without performance. "I wanted you to know that I know that." She walked out. Roman stood in the conference room with the afternoon light flat across the table and the signed documents in their organized stacks, and the particular quality of silence that follows something that has been a long time arriving. He stayed in it for a few minutes without moving. Then he picked up his jacket and walked to the window and looked at the city, the districts the endowment would reach, the waterfront 3 miles south, where 4 months ago he had run along an access road with his arm bleeding and everything unresolved. The skyline that had been the backdrop of 30 years of decisions, some of which had been right, and some of which had been costly, and most of which he had made alone. He thought about Thursday, about Geneva, about a private jet with a silver crest, and the way efficiency could be the language that carried something heavier than efficiency. He thought about his father. He put his jacket on, carefully because of the arm, still not fully healed, a scar forming along the forearm that would be there permanently, the kind of mark that reminded you of a night without asking. And he left the conference room and took the stairs down and walked out into the city afternoon, which was cold and ongoing and full of the specific noise of a place that doesn't stop for any individual accounting, no matter how long it has been coming. He walked without destination for a while. Then he took out his phone and called Marcus, who was in an office 2 miles away managing the operational restructuring with the methodical competence that had always made him indispensable, and he said, "How's the Kellner Street disbursement schedule looking?" "Clean," Marcus said. "First round goes out in 6 months, like planned." "Good," Roman said. "Keep it moving." "You sound different," Marcus said, in the careful way Marcus had of noting things. "I'm walking," Roman said. "That's not what I mean." Roman looked at the street ahead of him. Ordinary afternoon, people moving through it with their own weights and purposes and histories, none of which intersected with his. "I know," he said. "I'll explain it sometime." He put the phone in his pocket and kept walking, the scar on his arm catching the cold through his jacket sleeve, the city doing what the city did, and somewhere above it all, a Thursday flight that was, in the language 2 people had developed for saying the things that weren't ready yet for their full names, an itinerary, and a beginning, and the first careful mile of a very long road neither of them was walking alone.